All right. Good evening, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy spring. Happy birthday to me and anyone else, Aries season. As we wait for our guests to arrive, I just want to say good evening and welcome. And I know we're going to have a lively dialogue on the budget. But before we get into the proposed budget that Mayor Bowser just released here in the District of Columbia, we are going to touch on our intended topic today, which is family policing systems. And we pluralize it. So shout out to Up and Movement, shout out to Dorothy Roberts, shout out to Joyce McMillan, who's joined us, and we hope to have Joyce uh, Joyce here. And not sure why. Hey, Nina, can you see why Mark is in the chat and not in the back end of live stream? Maybe I'm going to send out this link. Or can you email the link, please, Nina, to Mark Lavoda? I kind of feel, and to Martinique, because I think Martinique and Mark are somewhere. Thank you. Somewhere else. Okay, so hopefully no more technical difficulties. Okay, so I'll try and focus and let Nina hopefully help troubleshoot so that Mark and Martinique are back here. So they are ready to join the dialogue. Let's hope we can get them in the back end. Okay, so I'm just gonna push forward. So we're going to talk about family policing. So while we wait for that, wait for the guests to come on, I want to talk about a couple of things. Just laying out the definition of some terms that we're going to go over. Okay, so today, here I want to start with this concept of reproductive justice, because that is beyond all things that we're going to talk about today. This is the pursuit that the DC Child Justice Coalition is focused on. And we know that there are many aspects of reproductive justice that matter. We know that reproductive justice in the Roe v. Wade framing and the repealing of Roe v. Wade is critical and important. We support abortion rights and the rights to choose to birth or not to birth. And in the choice to birth, we know that reproductive justice is a pursuit that is also for those of us that birth people. And so this definition our working definition here is from Dorothy Roberts. It's an article in 2015 that is a framework that includes not only women's right to not have a child, but also the right to have children and raise them with dignity in safe, healthy, and supportive environments. This framework repositions reproductive rights in a political context of intersecting race, gender, and class oppression. There was a caucus in the 90s, a Black feminist caucus that called people together to recognize that their activism had to be linked to social justice organizing in order to gain power, resources, and the structural needs to address the well-being of all women and birthing people, right? Because we know that all people that birth do not identify as women. It is from here that we begin to start to unpack family policing systems, and just going to lay out definitions today and get into dialogue tomorrow, because today what's hot on the press is talking about the mayor's budget. And I'm also delaying here to see if Martinique can get in on the back end. I'm so sorry, Martinique. I don't know why the link did not bring you here. And hopefully we're going to resolve that in a minute. I want to bring you on before we bring on Mark. And I see Mark in the back end. Thank you so much, Mark, for being here. And let me just go over a couple other terms here. So abolitionism. So it's another foundational concept in which our boot camp, there's Martinique, our boot camp is kind of unpacking itself, aligning itself with. It's certainly a principle of many of our partners in the coalition, notably Black Swan Academy. And so abolition, this is how the Acoma Project report kind of frames it, is that a world without harm isn't possible, and that a world without harm is possible and isn't what an abolitionist vision is purported to achieve. Rather, abolitionist or a world without harm isn't possible. It's saying that, and it isn't what an abolitionist vision purports to achieve. Rather, abolitionist politics and practices contend that disposing of people by locking them away in jails and prisons does nothing significant to prevent, reduce, or transform harm in the aggregate. So it rarely, if ever, encourages people to take accountability for their actions. Instead, our adversarial court system discourages people from ever acknowledging, let alone take responsibility for the harm they may have caused. At the same time, it allows us to avoid our own responsibilities to hold each other accountable, because we typically hide behind the hard hand of the law. I will say this too, in terms of, well, more specific to family policing, that it's not just about prisons, right? It's not just about locations of carcerality, whether it's juvenile detention, whether it's mental health institutions. Those are extremely important. We also know that when we look at the context of family policing and the punitive nature and what the goal of abolitionism has specific to family policing, is that we know that determination of parental rights, any infliction on parental rights or the right to parent, um, or dissolution of those rights, does cause harm to children, causes harm to caregivers as well, especially poor caregivers who may be on social benefits. So, and a lot of those social benefits are dependent on the child being in the home. So if the child is removed from the home for issues linked to poverty, because majority of the cases reported for child abuse and neglect are really cases of neglect, more cases of neglect than physical abuse or sexual abuse. And any number I know is important. I know that's always the pushback, but keep in mind that that poverty, if we do things to address and alleviate poverty, we also reduce harms against children and their families, but particularly disabled families. And that punishment looks like not helping. Punishment looks like leaving families to be in poor housing conditions, leaving families to face evictions without, transitional support or adequate transitional support, leaving families to fend for themselves, right, in the middle of a recession as prices go up, leaving families to fend for themselves, to figure out their medical situation, if they cannot read, if they have low access to technology, devices, internet, et cetera, without making these accommodations, the result ends up being punitive. So, there's so much more to go down the rabbit hole. We're going to spend our next week going even further down the rabbit hole. But right now we have a rare opportunity, because our boot camp coincides with budget season. And our boot camp exists to change public policy, particularly around how we implement school-based mental health. And so we want to look at particularly that system today. but I will be probing and asking a few other questions in terms of looking at the budgets. So, Mark, a couple other budgets that I think impact families, and I think they're all budget cuts, but maybe you'll help me translate those in just a minute. But before we bring up Mark Lavoda, we're going to bring up Martinique Robb, who is our distinguished caregiver, who's part of the cohort, who's going to join us on the live, who is joining us. And I'm glad you found the way to here. I am not allowed to send out any more technology links. Every time I send it out, it seems like it doesn't go too well. But welcome, Martinique. I'm just going to pull up this slide to show your bio and your picture, and you're on mute, by the way. And so then we'll talk up and then bring Mark. So Nick is a caregiver of three children. Two of them have different needs. Her 12-year-old son has autism, and her 8-year-old child has epilepsy. She's a mother and an advocate, not just for her own kids, but to help all kids. I believe Martinique is active in PAVE, Parents Amplifying Voices in Education. No, has been at some point. No, right? But we gonna get Martinique out in the streets. I know that Martinique comes from a long line of activists. I know her father, very well, active in Spaces in Action, and so I know it's in your bloodline, and I know you're packing a lot of fire, a lot of heat, a lot of questions. I know you're gonna pass on to Mark. I know there are other caregivers in the chat that are gonna be asking their questions as well. But Martinique, the floor is yours. Tell us a little bit about you. What brings you to advocacy? What's your story?
Hello, thank you, Shioma. Yes, I'm trying my story, just trying to
Martinique, I
make
can't hear
everything.
you.
You can't hear me? Oh my gosh, wait. She can't hear me. Oh, hello? Can you hear me now?
No.
Hello? Still can't? Let me take my earphones out. Wait. I'm sorry, I apologize. Just trying to have my headphones in. Everything is all which ways. I'm sorry. This is live. Wrong. I'm just all over. Can you hear me now? You still can't.
Do you want to try logging off and coming back in?
Uh, yeah. Can you hear me?
No. You can hear her? Is the
I
problem
can try
me?
to log off and come back in. Yeah. Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
So everyone can hear you now. Okay. I can hear you now. I'm so sorry. I couldn't hear you before, but others can hear you. So sorry about that. All right. So floor is yours, Martini.
I'm gonna log off and come back on.
I can hear you. We can hear you now, Martinique. Say something.
Hello. Why does it hear me?
We
Hello.
can hear you. I can hear you now. I can hear you.
What's going
Uh,
on with the audio? Hello.
Okay, so yeah, we are having technical, so you can't hear me. So maybe do log out and come back in,
The what?
but you can't hear me. Okay, so let's see. All right, so she's gonna log off, come back in. We're just gonna power through. So in the interest of time, I did want her to come on before bringing on Mark because I really want her input here as we go over the budget. So let me just talk a little bit more about definitions. And if not, I'll just get right into Mark. Thank you for your patience. And hopefully Martinique will join us. So a couple other terms that that I think are critical to the dialogue on family policing and the vision, the world that we actually want to see. So, I mean, part of what we don't want to see is colonialism. And the process of decolonizing is a mechanism that allow for restoration and reconciliation. And we believe there is restoration and reconciliation that is due to many families, and harms caused to families through the centuries, that we don't anticipate is, unless there's a national conversation around reparations, but that, a good place to start is by causing less harm, right? A good place to start in terms of restoring and reconciling is by recognizing that there are systemic harms caused to families that that do utilize carceral logic, and that, the task from an abolitionist framework here is not just decolonial, it's decarceral, in that it's not only and not even primarily about abolition in terms of tearing things down, but it's also about building up, creating new institutions, new processes, new systems, new roles that help to alleviate, um, the harms that we've seen, the unmet needs that we know that are real, on and on, and so much more to discuss, if not tonight, next week. But Martinique,
Can you hear me now?
can you hear me? Yes, I can hear
Oh,
you. Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. Oof. Okay. So we just pray that, that we're going to have a clear connection for the rest of our short time together this Friday, rainy Friday evening, first Friday of spring. So the floor is yours, Martinique. Tell us a bit about you. What drives you to
Um,
advocacy? What are you passionate about?
Passionate about having all the special and different type of kids and everything, the same services and the same things it's about as everyone else, and as regular kids as well. You keep leaving our kids out and cutting things off, but yet extending things for regular kids, regular time, out of school time, things like that, but nothing for our own special kids, because we know DCPCS can't deal with them and aftercare and stuff, and we can't have aftercare, and then they want us to pay unless, and then they just sitting there if they are, not doing anything, no help, nothing really for them. So it's like, why put them in that and put them something else? I want things to be right for everyone, especially, being in DC and living in DC. We all need to have the same rights, and they're not giving it to us, and then they want to cut stuff, you know even with this mayor budget, which is BS, because soon as you have this stuff that you said that was going on, I done wrote the stuff that for the 2 billion for DCPS and charter. Where's our money and funds? You said something with mental health and behavioral, but nothing with the special needs budget, helping with more OT and ABA and speech in schools. None of that's happening, none of that's going. So my passion is like, we need to have everything all around. Stop cutting us, cutting corners, doing what y'all want, because if your kid was special or anything, you get what you needs to get done. But y'all is like, bump the rest. We don't care. And I done seen it in these council members' faces, especially with Mendelson and a couple other people and stuff. And it's like, seriously, we can't even count on you. You just shaking your head and saying, yeah, yeah, yeah. But in actuality, it's like, oh, I don't know why you talking to us about this. This issue's done with. We already done delegated this to somewhere else and allocated this to somewhere else and all this stuff. So I don't know, Chioma. It's a lot.
So let's back up a little bit. We're going to get to the budget, and hopefully
I
we
know.
will. I mean, the goal would be to leave out that we can actually do something about it. And I just love talking to Mark because he keeps it real and, brings a lot of knowledge and wisdom, not just in terms of like what's in a budget, but also like the cultural practices that inform how some of these budgets even get formed. But before we get into that, just Who is Martinique? Did you grow up in DC? Did you go to DCPS schools? Who are
No,
you?
I
No.
actually didn't. I was born in DC, but I was basically raised out in Virginia in Fairfax. So I um, was living out there, been out there, and then graduated at well, at the time, TC Williams and stuff. And went to school, didn't do no actual college and stuff. Life happened, kids and stuff. And so I did go back to school eventually and got my bachelor's, a BS in government contract management, and looking for work. Nothing happening. Went back to school, got my master's, went in for project management, but yet trying to find something, nothing happening. I've been doing Uber Eats. That's the only thing I know where I could be able to, especially since when was my kid was young, when Jeremiah was young, you know, and being autistic, and yet I can't leave the job and say I got to go pick my son up because if something's going on, I could cancel the delivery and keep it moving, go pick him up and do what I need to do, So I like the I like that aspect of it, but it is tiring, But right now, I got hooked up and I got a job as a classroom monitor slash substitute at Falls Church High School, and and man, I see how a lot of things is there than how things are with DCPCS, with DC schools and stuff, and it's like,
How so? What's the
well,
difference?
well, I don't know how it is with high school because I'm in high school, so I only could predict because they've been having me with. They call the area the pod area for all the special type of needs, and I really, I really commend these people who work there in that area because they they train and everything, and there are no nurses or none of that. Even though we all have different type of hats and are and stuff, actuality, but I'm helping them. It's like for wheelchair bound kids in the area, in that pod area, and yet um they all communicate differently and everything. A lot of them with their eyes, a lot of them can't talk, a lot of them have a communication device, things like that. And then there's a lot of other ones, they go up to age like 21, 22, and then they age out and go to this Davis Center and stuff. So while they're in school, they take them there, learning how to work, things like that, taking them to different places. And then they're asking them, what do you want to do? Do you want to work outside? Do you want to work inside? Do you want to sit down or do you want to stand up? Do you want to wear fancy clothes or do you want to wear regular clothes? And I'm like, wow. And they answering this and letting them know how they, what they want to do, far as work wise and things like that. And I'm like, wow. And they all have IEPs. And I just don't see the things like that in our schools,
Mm.
the caring and everything. And, they change, they changed them, they wheelchair bound. They're there all day, trying to learn, answering with their eyes, yes or no, things like that.
So, what's your experience as a parent then? How has it been with both of your children with two different disability categories?
It's been a little better. Jeremiah, I would say, has definitely grown, and the school has definitely seen it because his first year at the school that he's in, this charter school, um, it was online, pandemic time, and it was
Uh-huh.
hard. And I didn't like it. He didn't like it. They didn't like it. So much was going on. He was only online for 30 minutes, and that was it. He wasn't all day, half a day, come back. Nope. 30
And he's
minutes, go
12
back.
now.
Now, since last year and this year, he has really grown. He has become more of himself. He is talking more answering questions, asking questions. And I'm like, wow, a lot has changed. And my little one, I'm getting him together, but it's been hard because I going back and forth with the neurologist and the neuropsychologist and the things like that to find out what's going on because he's not retaining memory. And that is a big problem. Not
Mm.
retaining memory, and they trying to help him at the school he's in, this new school and stuff, but yet if I say cat dog bone and then say hand me this or get that, what did I just ask you? And you can't remember cat dog bone, that's a problem. So I'm doing something with that, and besides, they get there late to school. Jeremiah's bus didn't come to about 9:30 yesterday to pick him up.
That's OCDOT,
Yes,
right?
indeedy. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And you
Mm.
you send me a call and a text just about every day or every other day, and I don't know who or which kid is it, because my daughter, she'll let me know since she's taking care of them in the morning and making sure they get on the bus since I got to leave out early. And I'm like, wow, this is like not right. She called me and tell me like, yeah, can you call RC to find out what's going on because he's still here. The bus is not here.
Mm.
And I'm calling, I'm at work, I'm on hold, like always on hold for the longest time, and then by the time she sent me a text like, yeah, the bus came, and I'm like, it's 9:30. Well, he didn't get to school till about 10.
So now I don't know how you experience this, but I know that when the bus goes out of routine like that, for my 12-year-old autistic son, like I'm most nervous because he's likely to have a meltdown or have some other kind of dysregulation
Right.
incident at times when he's off routine. Is that something like, what are your child's behavioral health needs, or both of your children's behavioral health needs? Does what helps, what harms?
Oh man. Well, out of routine is not much with both of them. With the youngest, it's no problem with Isaiah, but with Jeremiah, it depends. He has a routine every day, school, and then Tuesdays, Wednesday, Thursdays, ABA. He has his days where he don't want to go, but I still make him go and
Is
stuff.
that in school? ABA, is that in school?
No,
That's out of school.
that's out of school. That's out of school because he goes there during the summertime too.
Is he getting ABA in school or any other
He's
kind of?
supposed to be getting ABA in school, but I don't know if he is or not. I know he's getting OT and speech in school, but I have never seen the ABA person. I know they was talking about it. They was bringing somebody in. They said they had someone, but yet I have not seen him. I have not seen him at the IEP meetings.
Right, right. Well, there's a lot to be said about. So, if you had one big wish, and this is important because I'm going to bring Mark in to the dialogue in just a second. But okay, top three, not one, top three, top top three things that you would like to see funded in DC schools,
Um,
or funded better, or at all.
all right, more funds for delegated for special needs, as far as getting more um, appropriate teachers, more appropriate staff, as OT, speech, and ABA, and not say it, not have to do it, but yet actually do it. You know, out of school time, not just for regular kids, but for the special needs kids, somewhere for them to be able to go and to be able to participate in the things they want to do, basketball or whatever was going on, soccer, whatever. They want to participate and do the same things. I see it at the school where I'm at, right? And oh gosh, third one, more mental health in school, transparency and mental health in schools, behavioral health, that needs to be more in school, and not just, oh, you need to come get your kid or anything like that. Things like that needs to be dealt with and done appropriately in a proper way. and they're not getting done at all.
Okay, so now in the boot camp we talked about this Monday, we spent quite a bit of time unpacking family policing systems, and based on like what you wish to see, right? Like I'm always concerned, what kind of leads me to thinking about family policing in the context of school mental health is that, if we maybe approached, if we offered more support, then maybe we wouldn't need as much crisis care. I mean, that's the basis of
Right.
the coordinating council. That's the spirit of, if we say the law that governs, the law that was passed to govern the implementation of this process, even though quiet as it's kept, it's not very much based on that law. Like the coordinating council is kind of doing its own thing. But let's just talk about, we're going to have a better time, I think, next week,
Right.
unpacking family policing. But I just want to get just a few your thoughts on, you know this the first time you're hearing that concept? What are your thoughts about the concept of family policing? Do you have any experience navigating any systems that you would consider being policed as the head of the household of your family?
Um, Controlling behavior. I mean, I'm trying to get that control in my home, especially with Jeremiah. Um, and as far as policing as in what? As like in school or in.
Yeah, so we broke it down in terms of, well, primarily the clip that we looked at was with Joyce McMillan, and her negative experience navigating child protective services in New York, um, not DC, the different ways in which perhaps you may be referred for an investigation or go to court, truancy court, you
Right.
know, those kinds of things.
Well, I've been to so many meetings, and I've gone to this meeting where this man, this white man, I can't remember his name, but he's a retired police officer, and he has an autistic child, and he goes around the DMV area besides DC because DC does not allow it. And I asked one of the council members about it, but yet they sidebar me to something else. Um, he teaches them what to look for, how to deal um, with mental things, because a lot of times these police officers think that, oh, this person's crazy, they're on drugs or things like that. They don't know the signs, the symptoms, or anything, and they just want to just point blank shoot. And a couple people who's autistic have gotten shot like that because they don't know and not paying attention, not bringing somebody on mentally or anything like that. And he goes around and teaches in Maryland and in Virginia, but he's not allowed in DC. And DC is just a high rate with this every day with the shooting and things like that, and hoping nothing happens with mine. And I had to run in a couple of times with police, and you know want to know whose kid is this or what. And I'm like, it's my kid. What you talking about? What is the problem? I had too many things, but they don't they don't have enough, or what I was told, they have one or two mental health people, but yet they do not bring no mental health person out to the scene when something's happening.
Mm. Yeah, shout out to ACLU. ACLU has a crisis response coalition that we recently joined, and they're talking about crisis care. So
Right.
TBD on that. More to talk about that, and I hope you tune in next week. I actually love for you to come back,
Right.
along with another parent next week when there are a couple of other caregivers that are going to talk more about this. But I want to switch pace right now. I want to bring Mark, and I want to breathe because I've been trying to understand what's going on with the budget. I've been looking at the
Yeah,
document.
I was catching the budget and the class, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. I'm writing
So
stuff down. I had notes written down. I'm like, no, she didn't. No, she
good,
didn't.
good, 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 good. You got notes for the budget. Great, great. Because well, there are a couple of things I want to say. Just a little bit beforehand. So for the benefit of our cohort, please come with your questions in the chat. Get them to me anyhow you want. If you want to text them to me, if you want to put them in the chat, we'll put up on the screen. Martinique, you're holding the energy for the cohort today. Some you can see someone tuning in, but there are two parts to DC budget, and lots of the information I'm going to share right now is from the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, just to kind of do a layup so Mark can talk specifically about, the budget that we want to look at, which is school-based uh, mental health, behavioral health, and I want to get his input on a couple of other ones. Make sure I'm looking at these negatives as correctly. But there's the operational budget, which allocates resources to run the city's day-to-day government, paying for things such as salaries of police officers, librarians, electricity, phone bills, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the capital budget, which the costs are associated with building and maintenance infrastructure, roads, schools. Most of the time, when public officials speak about the budget, they're talking about the operating budget, and we'll see the lines in the budget. So the guide primarily focuses on the operating budget because that's kind of where activities and programs kind of take place. Um, Based on a report, or what they call the Residents Guide to the DC budget, the Fiscal Policy Institute notes that the biggest share of the operating budget goes to human support services. So that's a lot of what we would constitute as family policing potentially. The majority of spending goes to healthcare programs that serve more than a third of DC residents. Next biggest goes to early education and public education. So that's birth to 3, K to 12. MPD regularly spends above, its approved budget because of a lot of overtime. And I guess there's a new law that was passed to kind of regulate spending. I know that there's some talk about the commission, the Criminal Code Commission also being sunset, not having any more funding to go ahead with a lot of the drama that's gone back and forth around DC statehood that kind of was sparked because of the, revisions to the criminal code. There are three sources for how the DC makes revenue, as in how we get money, through property tax, to individual tax, income tax, and to sales and use tasks. And we also know that there is a budget cycle, where we kind of were, I think, DC is pretty well organized when it comes to this and keeping to our calendar and our schedule, even though it kind of fluctuates. And I remember last year, probably because it was the pandemic, the budget season started later than usual. So usually around March, about this time, the mayor releases the budget. But before that, from September to December, agencies are starting to develop their asks. They begin to know what kind of gaps they may need for the next year. And then coming into January, the performance oversight hearings, which we are just coming out of, happens to further inform, areas and the council members may want to hone in on, that the mayor may have missed. It's intended to be a democratic process. It's not a perfect process, but we've got one. And then where we are right now, mayor submits the budget. It goes back and forth, between council and the mayor till we get at a balanced budget, and then it gets voted on between May and June, and then sent to Congress. And usually it's a passive approval, but I don't know, these days, I think we're looking at things a little differently because it's a different political climate around statehood and hands off DC. So before getting into that, I'm just going to take this down. Mark, welcome. Mark is heads the DC Behavioral Association, which FixPad is probably part of, and just I think Mark is my personal teacher here when it comes to navigating and understanding how Medicaid helps and sometimes can, the nuances of Medicaid can be very hard to understand, and how it kind of lends to creating a a world where behavioral health can be priority. So, Mark, floor is yours. So, yes.
Hello.
Great. Well, thanks, Jim. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Martinique, look forward to your participation in the conversation. And I'm watching the chat, so as other people engage, I'm happy to try to be responsive as best I can. Shioma asked me to go over a little bit about kind of how the budget is organized, and of course, she just gave you the high level, but we want to tell you a little bit more in depth about how you can learn more within the budget once you actually see it. So first is finding it. The budget is presented on the DC Office of the Chief Financial Officer's website. I'm going to try to share my screen. We'll see how this goes. So can we, goodness gracious.
I
We are
think
going
oh, there it is.
There
Okay.
we go. So I've pulled up the Department of Behavioral Health portion of the budget, and we've got, as you'll see, 3 different attachments, and that's where the meat of the content is. The chapter is what the DC Fiscal Policy Institute guide referred to as the operating portion of the budget. There are tables that explain how the chapter works in DC accounting. I don't find them very helpful, but occasionally there are specific reasons to use the tables. And then the capital budget is the same as the DC Fiscal Policy Institute described, the kind of infrastructure investments. We're going to go into the chapter and just make sure that people see a chapter. Again, the Department of Behavioral Health is an example. It's an example that is a department that I'm familiar with because I work with the Department of Behavioral Health a lot. And so want to tell you a little bit about an agency that I'm actually familiar with, but every budget chapter is organized with the same structure, with a couple exceptions for agencies that just operate very differently. So what you first see is that there's a table, RMO-1 in this case, but RMO is the Department of Behavioral Health, and this is just table 1 for the Department of Behavioral Health. And that table is where you can right away see the really big motion for what's happening for that agency's budget in a given year. So you see that DBH's operating budget increased by 2.2%. Their number of full-time equivalent staff was reduced by 1.2 full-time equivalent staff, and their capital budget changed by 25.2%. And here you can see that in numbers terms, right? Our approved budget, you see that $377 million goes up to $385 million. That's your 2.2% change. Your 1,448.4 employees is reduced slightly to 1,431.5 employees, a 1.2% change. And then the capital budget was $12.7 million last year, will be $9.5 million proposed in FY24. So every agency budget has this table right at the top to look for those key things. And then there's a description of the mission of that agency and a summary of the services. And so that you will see for every budget chapter, and you can very quickly learn what the government thinks that agency is supposed to do. I'm going to scroll down and just point you to the next chart, which again is for DBH RMO, and then for each agency. This is chart number 2. These are your gross funds operating budget numbers. And so this shows you, you'll start to see dollars in thousands and full-time equivalents. And most of the charts in the operating budget are organized this way, where you see the historic spending, you see the change, and then that's presented both in numbers and percent. And then over here on the right-hand side, you will see the affected personnel, how many DC government employees are increasing or decreasing in these same categories. DBH's budget here is not particularly exciting. You don't see lots of big number changes on either side, the dollars or the full-time equivalents. In years where the budget changes dramatically, it's really easy to find it looking at this chart, which is kind of your high-level overview of what's happening with that agency's budget in terms of dollars and in terms of people. And then I'm going to scroll you down a little bit farther. This is probably the most important table in the operating budget. Again, RMO for DBH and 4. This is table number 4 for each agency. And that's the proposed operating budget by division, program, and activity. And so you will see here DBH presents a series of different subsections. And each of those has numbers on the left that are these program activity codes. And then you see the spending, again, in dollars and in full-time equivalent government employees. And so this is the really helpful chart to start getting into the details of how the budget works. So DBH is organized with an agency management group, an agency a financial operations group, the Behavioral Health Authority, St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the Accountability Group, the Clinical Services Division, the System Transformation Division, which you see has zeros because it's been disbanded in recent years, the Adult and Transitional Youth Services Group, the Child and Adolescent and Family Services Group, the Policy Planning and Evaluation Administration, and then legacy work from the Addiction Prevention Recovery Administration and the Community Service Administration, again, both of which have been discontinued, along with a couple of small other accounts. Important for you to know, those divisions then are each followed by detailed descriptions, and those descriptions go on for several pages so that you can see and read about what each of those divisions are supposed to do. And again, every agency presents their budget the same way, that you will see a set of different agency groups within the agency. And then there's a detailed written description about what those administrations or divisions or parts of those agencies are supposed to do. So I go here really quickly anytime that I'm looking at an agency budget, and I start looking for this number, which is the change from the previous year as a subtotal for each of those divisions. So we see here, agency management went up by $2 million. Financial operations went up by $17,000. The Behavioral Health Authority went down by $341,000. St. Elizabeth's down by $1.3 million. Accountability down by $67,000. Clinical services down by $1 million. Here, a big number up, $20 million increased for adult and transitional youth services. 3.9 million reduced for child and adolescent services, 7.5 million reduced for planning. So that gives you a good sense. And then at the very bottom, there's a roll up, total proposed budget. And that shows you, again, these same numbers that we saw at the very first table. Last year, there was a $377 million budget. The proposed FY24 is $385 million. And so the change is $8 million increased in overall spending. And then similarly for personnel, a reduction of 16.9 FTEs total, that 1.2% change in personnel. So really important to look at this chart, understand what's happening by looking for those big changing numbers. This again is dollars in thousands, so you have to add 3 zeros for whatever this number shows. 723 is 723,000, 33 is 33,000, and then a bigger number like this, 2.1 is million. So it's $2.127 thousand. $1,000, and so that's 2.1 million. So that's the important thing to know about the money presentation. That's one of the most valuable tables. And then after all of this description of the division work, there are a couple small things just to watch. Every agency has to say if there's a division structure change. DBH has none for the FY24 budget, but other agencies might. So those are always important things to watch out for. This table summarizes the key changes of where money is being removed, where money is being changed based on, where money is changing because of one-time costs, where money is changing because of recurring local dollar funds, and then any other changes to taxes or federal funds available. So that can sometimes be helpful to understand why things are happening. And then we're getting near the end. You'll see we're on page 16 of 17 for this budget. And you see this line that's the recurring budget line. And that recurring budget starts a second narrative section where this tells you DBH is experiencing an $8.5 million reduction in its one-time funding. It tells you what's being reduced, that there's $7 million reduced from mental health rehabilitation services, $1 million reduced from the hospital, $500,000 reduced for opioid services, $200,000 reduced from the crisis team, $150,000 reduced for studying the school behavioral health program, which was specifically a study about the payment rates. And then the mayor's proposed budget section says, okay, but we're also going to increase some things. And so you see the mayor increasing by $766,000 to make sure that DBH can deal with some of their just cost of doing business. We see here phone rentals, electricity bills, those kinds of things. There's a $7 million grant and a couple extra staff members to manage some federal grants. There's a $574,000 change based on some Medicaid payments that DBH is using, which is separate from the Medicaid payments to DBH providers. That's the individual Medicaid payments that DBH uses for their own services. The mayor's budget also has decreases. We're going to remove 1.2 million and 7.3 staff based on some programs that are ending and based on some cost savings. There's an increase of $24.5 million for the district's Medicaid match. Those are provider payments. And an additional $1.7 million for housing case management, an additional $1 million for patient medication payments, and a reduction of $1.5 million and nearly 15 FTEs because the mayor is looking to spend money elsewhere, and a decrease in some payments that are received for hospitals that serve communities that can't pay. And that happens a lot at St. Elizabeth's Hospital because Medicaid does not pay for care at St. Elizabeth's for anyone who's there longer than 90 days. And most people stay at St. Elizabeth's much longer than 90 days. And then at the bottom this year, there's a new table. This has not been in previous budget books.
Mark, why doesn't Medicaid pay for more than 90 days at St. Elizabeth's?
Because it's considered an institute for mental disease, and institutes for mental disease are not reimbursed by the federal government for stays longer than 90 days as Medicaid reimbursable services.
Sounds like a very archaic name. Mental disease.
It's very unfortunate. It's an unfortunate policy with an even more unfortunate name. But based on the idea, when it was originally instituted in 1976, that people with mental illness should live in the community. And so we weren't going to pay states to keep people institutionalized for longer than 90 days, or the states needed to do that with their own money. So at the time, it was a progressive policy change, but then we didn't actually provide any money to take care of people in the community. So instead, all of those folks generally these days are in jail. And of course, that's where none of them need to be. So there's a little history lesson. This table, just pointing out the last table in the budget book this year for each agency, table 7 for the agencies, is a table of FTE changes that shows if there are FTEs in or out supporting other agencies. And so in this case, DBH is paying for 2 staff who right now are reporting to the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, and for 4 staff who are reporting to the Department of Human Services. I personally have no idea what those people are doing, but in other agency budgets, it's a little more clear why that might make sense. So that's, I recognize already something that feels a little overwhelming, but as you look at each of the budget chapters, because they're presented in this very consistent way, once you get familiar with how it works, you can expand that use to any other agency budget chapter that you need to look at. So hopefully that's helpful. I see Latifa's question about when a budget line item is reduced, is a reason behind the change explained? A little, and so again, you tend to have to go down to this narrative. And in that narrative about the recurring budget and the mayor's proposed budget, you see the key things, these reductions, the 8.5 million, here's why they were reduced, the mayor's changes, including the mayor's decreases here and reductions here. Technically, a decrease and a reduction are different in the way the mayor's budget is presented. And so you see some explanations. It's not perfect. The agencies kind of pick the things that are most important in their view about what needs to be explained about what's changing. But sometimes things that change, you don't get very much information about why they're changing. And sometimes things that don't appear to change that much have a lot changing once you start to scratch underneath the surface. So it's a little tricky in both directions in that respect. I know we said that we wanted to talk for a second about school-based, and so we'll come to that more in depth. But just to give you a point of reference, in the budget book, school-based lives on this line. It is in the Child and Adolescent Family Services group. That's the Child, Adolescent, and Family Services Administration. And it is this program activity code 6620, school-based behavioral health services. You can see the history from FY22 when that money first got moved into this line, and that number grew substantially last year by about $11 million. And this year, from FY23 to FY24, the proposal is for that to grow by $113,000. So that's your high level, is the recurring funding for school-based behavioral health services has $113,000 increase, a very small positive change. The trick, and there are some tricks in the DBH budget. The trick is that DBH this year has been telling us that they are using one-time funds to pay for some of the work that's being done in the school behavioral health expansion. Last year in the mayor's budget, there was a section at the end before you got to the total proposed operating budget that was called ARPA expenses, which were one-time American Recovery Act payments that the DC government had the opportunity to use over the course of a 4-year period. And the district in total has received something like $8 billion from the federal government in response to the COVID public health emergency. Now that includes both those ARPA payments specifically and also other federal grants that were made available to respond to the pandemic, but still a huge amount of money when the district government's annual budget is about $15 billion. That's nearly a half a year of the government's total expenses made available additionally over the course of a 4-year time period. That money is all going away. And that includes millions of dollars that DBH used this year to increase the size of the grants provided to community-based organizations for doing school behavioral health services. So when we see this line that shows the school-based behavioral health services are increasing by $113,000, that's true for the recurring money that was previously in the budget without all of that federal support. It doesn't include all of the federal support that's going away. Based on my best guess, and at this point it is really, it's an educated guess, but it's a guess. It looks like DBH has available about enough money to set CBO grants next year at $80,000 compared to the $99,300 that CBOs are receiving this year. So is there recurring money? Yes. Is there a lot of it? Yes. $36 million is a ton of money in the DC government budget, especially for a human service program, especially one that's entirely locally funded, no Medicaid money associated with it. So it is a lot of money. It's also not enough to keep doing what we're doing. So that's one of the tricks that you have to be aware of, is where are the numbers. The same thing is happening if you look up a little higher in this line 6515, behavioral health rehabilitation local match. You see that last year $43 million was approved. Next year $61 million is approved. That is a $17.8 million increase in Medicaid payments for community behavioral health services. But look what the mayor does in the way that this gets presented in the budget book. The budget book says, we're providing a one-time increase of $24.5 million to support Medicaid match. It's an enhancement. When you see the mayor do her budget presentation, she's saying in one of her PowerPoint slides, we're adding $24.4 million for behavioral health services. But read the fine print. Just a couple paragraphs earlier, the DBH budget shows that the recurring budget has a $7 million reduction in mental health rehabilitation services. So just to make very clear, the budget book is a starting point for understanding what's in the budget. The budget chapters have important information both in the numbers and in the narrative. And then you do still have to watch out for the gimmicks where money gets moved and suddenly it has a different impact than it might have otherwise, or money that we pretend is a really big increase is not quite as big because there's some other money being removed somewhere else.
That's right. And I just heard that repeated again at the MCAC. So it's the narrative, but so, okay, there's so many questions. I'm sure that
I'll give you like the 3-minute snapshot of the capital budget, just to make sure that people know. And the capital budget is a lot easier to read. Here's your capital budget. You get your mission, you get your background. The capital program objectives tend to tell you why any capital expenses are budgeted. The recent accomplishments are exactly that. They tell you how they spent the capital money that they had available to them in the previous year. There's a weird explanation chart that takes half a page on its own. And then each capital project has a 1-page summary that's actually fairly straightforward to read. That's what department, who's actually doing the work, where is it located, what's the status of the project, how much money, what are we going to do? So in the DBH budget this year, the one capital item is that at 1338 Park Road, which is Park Road Northwest, because for some dumb reason, they couldn't appropriately label where this is happening, a firehouse is being rehabilitated in Columbia Heights that will be converted into the next stabilization and sobering center. And DBH thinks it will take up to $9.5 million to complete that rehab. Just wanted to show you that capital budget, much simpler to understand, much simpler to read and digest. The good news with capital dollars too is the district government's bond rating is very good. The district borrows money for most of its capital projects at a very low financing rate, and that actually allows the district to spend smaller amounts of money in any given fiscal year, because they're able to subsidize that through their bonds. So the capital budget ends up being cheaper for the district than the operating budget in most cases over the long run. So that's the capital budget. But back to the operating budget, because I know that the operating budget is definitely there's a lot going on this year, and DBH's budget is actually one of the nicest looking budgets, even though I just pointed out some serious flaws with the DBH budget.
Well, I mean, it almost sounds like it's like this is a layup. Like in 3 years, well, not even 2 years, we're gonna feel the problems that are going to happen when the ARPA funds are completely gone, the so-called Medicaid additions. There's no statement of sustainability, even if the mayor is presenting it as like this asset, this bonus money. It's a one time in any case, and it's not really, because there's money going away. So overall, what does this mean for DC families? How would you, weather check wise, what's your weather check on this DBH budget? Yeah.
So, I mean, the DBH budget is partly cloudy. The rest of the budget is pretty stormy. So I don't think we should kid anyone about that. The mayor had an option in 2020 at the height of the pandemic, when the federal funds really first started ramping up significantly, when Congress passed the big bills that led to that $8 billion of additional money available. Some states chose to spend that money as quickly as possible. They spent that money in 2020 and 2021, and then it was gone. The district actually chose what I think was the fiscally prudent approach of spreading that money out for as long as it could reasonably make it last, and not overextending and then setting conditions for everything to fall apart. Unfortunately, there are some things that are still falling apart because the district has also lost revenue during the same time period. And so,
we keep hearing that. Like, they've repeated that like a broken record, right? And that's real. That's real. That is real.
Right. That's real. Now, again, we have to think about the budget in the same way that the mayor thought about that federal money, the $8 billion, and spread it out over a 5-year period of how she was going to use it. The number that we keep hearing over and over so far in council oversight hearings on this budget is that there was a $1.7 billion deficit. But that's not a 1-year deficit either. That's a $1.7 billion deficit over 4 years. So, it's always important to make sure that we're listening really closely to like, what is this number really trying to tell us? Now, $1.7 billion is still $425 million a year. So that's not chump change in the DC budget. If you get that much money 30 times, you can pay for the whole DC budget. So, it's 1/30th of the DC budget is missing right now. And that's a lot to lose. We've all seen how much 4% inflation does, or 6% or 8% inflation. Well, this is 3.5% reduction in available funds. So it's a substantial change for the district to figure out how to weather. And you've heard, the response already to the mayor from some council members, and I'm sympathetic. If we balance that on the backs of the poor, then, who is the district government really trying to serve?
Exactly.
And so that's the real challenge with this budget is not only that we're losing money, but that we also are trying to make up for those losses by reducing the resources that are available to the people who need resources the most.
Whew. Martinique, what are your thoughts? What do
It's a
you
lot,
hear?
a
What do you feel?
mouthful, a whole lot of. Uh, I mean, I heard her when she was speaking on it and stuff about us budget proposed and money going where I guess supposed to, but yet it's still not towards our way. You know, that's not really broken down to me. And then why is we have these millions, but afterwards I see when I was looking at the paper a bunch of zeros, like 0.00. What does that actually mean when he was talking about that part?
About
Um,
which
when there are zeros,
When you was
is that
breaking the
what?
money down and stuff, and then it was like 0.00, and you allocated for something else or whatever.
Yeah, so I'll go back just for a second and try to share that slide again. So so when we look at the chapter, there are a couple sections where you just see zeros or small numbers run across. Usually that's and you see the example of it here. For some reason, something was allocated in a prior fiscal year, in this case in 2022. Um, and, and the district requires that the budget is presented with a 4-year look back. And so even if we're not spending money the same way anymore, so, for example, the Department of Behavioral Health used to have what it was calling its Community Services Administration. And that was where both children's mental health services as well as a set of adult services live. This $20 million is no longer in line 6912 because the next year the Child and Adolescent Services Administration was created, and then you see those numbers continue somewhere else. It's a really unfortunate thing about DC's budget process that when there's a reorganization, then things get zeroed out and they might just have moved to a different part of the budget. They're not actually eliminated. They just get presented somewhere else.
So, staying on this child and family adolescent services, I mean, am I reading this right that there are reductions, right? Like there are cuts here, or is that a correct assessment? I know there's overall cuts in FTEs. I assume that's mostly because of the workforce issues, not necessarily because people are getting fired, right?
Yeah, so the mayor made clear in her briefing on Wednesday that no one is losing their job. Any reduction in FTEs is a choice not to hire someone who was in the budget, a position that was in the budget in the previous year. So yeah, no DC government employees are losing their jobs through this budget. There may be some DC government employees that find themselves doing a different job, that their FTE is being moved, and then they're in a different administration, they have a different manager, they may have a different job assignment, but no one actually loses their job in this budget. We do though, for the Child and Adolescent Family Services group, we see reductions in several categories, and it's kind of a series of small cuts, right? The largest number that you see is a $1.2 million reduction in SUD prevention and treatment. I think we need more information about what that is. Some of that may instead be fixed because we're able to pay for some of those services now through Medicaid, and so that's an offset where somewhere else in the budget there was something that got changed that offsets that. but it might not be. There's a possibility that there are some real service cuts that are going to be happening in that group. That would be the biggest set of cuts. But I mean, it's worrisome here too to see that there's a $500,000 additional cut in crisis services. Most of that line item historically has been the funding available for CHAMPS, the Child and Adolescent Mobile Psychiatry Program. And a $500,000 cut in that program probably means that an entire team, maybe even two teams, were cut. So, now CHAMPS will have fewer teams available to deploy when they are operating. And that makes it longer of a wait for anyone who needs a CHAMPS team to come out and provide help to their kid. Or it means that, there won't be a response, and instead you're taking your kid to the ER, or you're waiting for MPD to respond to a 911. So, those are the kinds of things where, we need to look at the number. The number is less than $1 million. So for the budget, it's small, but the number is also, as you can see, a change from 1.8 million, nearly $1.9 million to $1.4 million is a cut of about 25% for that program. So, numbers need to be looked at, and how big of a change it is from the previous year also needs to be assessed.
I mean, it's never really clear what that division does in any case. I've been trying to figure it out, particularly as it relates to school mental health, and and so for there to be reductions without ever really knowing what that performance. I mean, that's part of the frustration of trying to understand this process, is that we have needs. There's a translation issue in terms of what does this say about those needs? I'm curious about Healthy Futures program, where I mean, it looks like early childhood seems to have done okay this budget, but I think Healthy Futures received cuts. Am I wrong looking at that?
Yeah, I mean, it might have. There's something that took a $655,000 cut and a reduction of 3.5 FTEs. Again, that looks like about the size of one Healthy Futures team, and so that is likely expansion that they were not able to undertake. I don't know that any existing Healthy Futures site will actually lose services, but it looks to me like they're not going to be able to expand Healthy Futures as far as they plan to in the FY23 budget. That's my best guess about what that number means.
Yeah, and I guess it's fair to raise it and get specific answers during budget season for that. So I mean, I tried looking at all these other budgets. I looked at OSSI's budget. I looked at the DME's, student transportation, DCPS. It's harder to see what the charters. Well, you can't really see the charter schools. They're not public budgets. They're nonprofits, but I just haven't seen any line in any of the budgets, correct me if I'm wrong, that speak about family engagement. And so everyone asks, in every council meeting I go to, there's a question about family engagement, but I don't see on anyone's budget, including DBH, the infamous line for family engagement. How am I supposed to understand that? What's your takeaway?
Yeah, so I mean, for DBH, there actually is a Family Services Administration, and so there should be the Office of Consumer and Family Affairs, and I took down your budget chart right now from the view, but I can tell you last year that was funded at $1.3 million. For the mayor's proposed, it's $993,000, a reduction of $300,000, no staff reductions. So there is a team at DBH that has 9 staff members that's supposed to do consumer and family engagement. Now, that's across all DBH consumers. There are, about 42,000 DBH consumers. And of course, they've got a good number of family members who are not receiving DBH services, but still need to be engaged in that care. For children, I think that number is around 6,000 children that are receiving DBH services. And the Consumer and Family Affairs Administration has to work with both children's engagement and adult service engagement. So, they're not fully equipped to do the work. There are also things that live in other weird places. Like some of that SUD prevention money is actually historically used for outreach contracts, where vendors have worked to engage youth around substance use choices and doing drug abuse prevention type of work. So sometimes it's just that the budget doesn't do a very good job of labeling where those things live. I think, and it shouldn't come to a surprise of most people in DC, every government employee has some responsibility for resident engagement. Otherwise, their job would have no justification, right? They're public servants. That's the definition of being a public servant, is you work for the public.
I mean, that's what we believe. I don't know if that's the practice. So
well, yeah. And the question though is how, right?
yeah.
And so that's what we also have to keep in mind is, we need government, I think, more reaching out into the community and not waiting for the community to come to government. And,
Exactly.
that is a big challenge. And then there's also, we need to make sure that the opportunities that government does provide for people to come in, that they're not just, a kind of, that they're not token opportunities, that people have the resources they need to get there, that they have, for some people, that means we need to have childcare support, we need to have transportation support, heaven help us.
Yeah, so I did. Speaking of education support, I do want to take a look at that budget because all I see are negatives all over that. Nina, can you share that? Can you share your screen for that? I mean, I could. So there is this screenshot here, but Nina, while you look to get that up, I mean, it's only just a screenshot of the top description of the overall operating budget. I don't know if this tells us anything. I hope, Nina, you could pull up the full budget. I could try and pull it up in a minute if I don't see you do that in a second. But sorry, what was that, Martinique?
I was saying, that was just fake scribble stuff that they just drew in just to deter us away
So
from
it does look like made up numbers.
right, because that's why I'm like $2 billion for DCPS and charter budgets. What is all
right.
of these things, all this other stuff, and them daggone zeros and all this stuff again? It's like, okay, you guys are still playing.
Okay, so Mark, while we have your expert eyes here looking at this, Nina, can you scroll? Is there a specific page? Where does your eye, when you look at a budget you haven't seen before, your eye goes to where first?
Yeah, so I'm doing the exact same thing that I told you I would do with the DBH budget. Look at this right-hand column, the change from FY23. And so you're seeing the operating portion of that budget is reduced by 3.8%. The FTEs are reduced by 7.1%, that's correct. And the capital budget is reduced by 73.6%. And those are all from different levels. So the next thing I'm looking at is the actual numbers. Right, our FY23 approved to our FY24 proposed looks like a change of about $5 million. That's the reduction. The FTE reduction looks like it's about, I don't know, that's a large number.
Well, because a lot of people retired in December. So,
Okay.
and apparently there are people still like quiet quitting every day in DOT.
Yeah,
So,
this here to me is even a bit of a discrepancy. It says it's a 7.1% change, but I'm counting nearly 100 FTEs. So, that is, I guess, a little less than 10% of the total number of FTEs that are involved. The capital budget change, neither of those numbers are very big, right? I mean, spending $1.4 million on capital versus $5.4 million on capital, it doesn't actually sound like they're spending a lot on capital for these
I
services
mean,
one way or the other.
yeah, I don't even know what their capital budget would be spent on, considering their buses. But I mean, I guess
Well, it might be
buses.
replacing buses.
It might be buses itself, right? Huh. So why would they reduce? Well, anyway, so Nina, can you scroll down some
Yeah,
more
actually,
here?
I just pulled up the capital portion of this budget. It's exactly that. The capital program objectives are about replacing buses. Says the current fleet is 697 vehicles. 454 are 2016 models or older. And they're working on buying new buses to improve sustainability. Um, but the buses that are part of the Aussie Transportation Division are part of the overall district bus replacement program. And so that number refers to Aussie's contribution to replacing all of the district's buses.
And you're seeing that in the narrative of the capital budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So now for these cuts, I know this isn't your jam here, right? But please humor me for a second.
Learning on the fly.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So the thing about this that when I think about behavioral health, I think again in terms of like all the underestimated contributing factors to stress and contributing factors to lower quality of life. So like we never get to the conversation of housing conditions because we're thinking about evictions all the time. We're not really thinking about, everyone's like, oh, the schools are getting cut. We can't even start thinking about creative program design and inclusion. I would put school mental health in that category as well. Like we're thinking just keeping the program alive to even start talking about like where creatively, like we want to see peer workers working. We want to see peer workers working in every division of the district government. We think they bring value of a different perspective in knowing that there isn't a monolith of peers. But when it comes down to this particular thing with behavioral health, like it's astounding how many parents who were not organized by any one organization independently came up to performance oversight hearings to testify specifically about the emotional harms caused by DOT, by Aussie DOT. Yet, we're looking at this budget and it's telling me nothing. It doesn't tell me we were heard. It tells me we don't matter. And I'm only responding to the negatives without, I don't have the knowledge of I am going to go back, use the new magic tools that I have here. I'm going to read the narratives. But overall, like, what's your read on this? Like, you don't know the nuances of the situation, but does this translate to you? I'm asking a leading question as something that is responsive to some of those potential needs that parents are raising?
So I think parents would need to be concerned if, and this I don't know, if those retirements are creating new vacancies, or if the district had additional FTEs allocated that they just never hired, right? Those are different. And so, like, are you actually going to see a reduced number of school bus drivers? Like, that's a real problem if that's going to happen. But if it's like we're not going to see the increase in school bus drivers that we had hoped we could get, that's not the same problem, right? So that's the first kind of like, what does this mean? So again, you asked me, how do I read this? I skipped this table. This table looks horrible, but I went down to the
Okay,
table.
next page,
Yeah,
Nina.
go to page 4 actually
Go to
of
page
this
4.
document. And so what I see on page 4 here, and actually scrolling down a little further in that table GO4, here's where I see big reductions happening, right? I see $4.2 million for the New York Ave operations control. I see 1.4 million for the Southwest ops. I see 1.3 million for Adams Place. I want to know which bus routes are controlled by which of those operating stations, right? That to me is the question about whether or not particular parts of the city are going to see substantial capacity reductions that have a meaningful impact. Then scroll down to like page 7. Page 7 is where we start to see that section that says recurring budget. Says reduction of $3.3 million to remove one-time funding, but it doesn't actually tell us what the one-time funding was used for. So that's a concern for me. What was that? What is that $3.3 million that got cut?
Yeah, what is
Mayor,
that?
don't know. Then the next section says we've increased $3.3 million to reflect fixed cost changes. Good, we're taking care of our fixed costs. Includes an increase of $363,000 to support equipment and machinery purchases. Fine. Includes an additional $1 million across programs to align the budget with grant awards. Well, what are those grants and what
What
are
are
they
those
used
grants?
for?
Yeah.
And then it says decrease $3.2 million because we have some anticipated savings and
Can you slow
realignment.
down, Nina? Nina, can you follow that?
Oh,
Yep.
sorry. We're on like, yeah, keep
Yep.
scrolling down a little further. So yeah, here's our, no, not that
No,
far.
no, no, no. No, go back up, Nina.
There you
Okay.
go. This section here, right? This is what I'm reading from to say like, well, what is going on here? So 3.3 million, 3.2, $3.3 million reduced to reflect anticipated PS savings. I don't know what PS is in this case. And realignment of fixed costs for fuel. So I guess they think gas prices are going down, or at least aren't increasing as fast as they would have, or they're not using as much
And
gas.
it's probably what they're using to set the reimbursements for the parents, because now they're asking us to drive our kids to school by ourselves, and they'll reimburse us if we want to, if we apply to it. And so this seems to also set that rate at a
Maybe.
lower rate than what we're actually paying at the pump.
The other thing, obviously, here is decrease of 63.6 FTEs. And this says it's removing inactive positions and correcting overinflated FTE counts. So, again, we're back to the question of like, how many of those people were actually hired? How big of an impact do those retirements have versus like, we never had those resources, so we don't know what it actually feels like to lose them. And then the same thing is happening in the reduce section, right? There's some hardware maintenance savings, but there's also a reduction through elimination of 39.5 vacant FTEs. Now, if the decrease of 63.6 FTEs and the reduction through the elimination of 39.5 FTEs is different, then we get to that 100 FTE reduction. And if most of those are bus drivers, then, again, how many of those positions were never hired?
Yeah.
And how
So, Paul,
are we
I,
actually losing?
I know you just said that, the budget distinguishes between a decrease and a reduction, but just to be clear, a reduction means elimination,
In this
right?
case, yeah.
So that means there's no, if there were, people all of a sudden and want to apply and this budget passes, they won't even have that money anywhere on reserve to hire those people.
Yeah,
This is
there's
going,
no vacancy. That job posting's getting pulled down.
okay. Okay. All right. I just want to be clear that
Yeah.
you know that my eyes, my lion eyes are, are seeing
No,
what's
I mean,
here.
to me, again, super quick, just trying to read this and understand it. I don't quite understand which routes are being affected based on which of those transport stations are seeing cuts. And I also don't understand, how many of those 100 FTEs that are being eliminated are people who were never really there versus how many of those are people who retired 3 months ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, in the interest of time and just to respect your where you are, I you know, I think we're just gonna have to, it's past 7:30 now. I hope that caregivers watching this will go and look at those different budgets and practice reading them and understanding them and figuring out where and how we can participate even more actively, considering like I can't deduce from any of these budgets what any of this means when it comes to the things that we actually want to see happen,
Well, and
infrastructural
Fatima,
changes.
if I can just make one further recommendation, right? What I said is that we see the budget book, and it doesn't always tell the full story, but it starts to tell us the story.
Mhm.
It is a really, in my mind, it is a really useful exercise to go to the DC Council and testify, this looks bad. Even if you're not sure what it actually means, and just put in the council's mind, put in the mind of the council staff who are listening to testimony and trying to figure out what the committee is going to do. Like, oh, we need to look at that line more carefully. And so even if I can't specifically say, I know what the $1.3 million reduction is from the community response team, I can say, I'm concerned to see a $1.3 million reduction in the community response team. I know that they've had challenges staffing up. And so in the short run, this might be a financial savings for the district. But I also think our community needs those services. And I'm disappointed to see the mayor prepared to go without those services just because it's been hard to get people hired. You can say all of that without actually knowing what's happening, right? All you need to
Yeah.
know is the line says the number's going down, and that doesn't seem good.
Yeah, because that's about as much as I I was like, I see this and it looks pretty bad. It looks like negatives all around. And then it was like a negative 72. I was like, that's a lot, and that's a huge negative, whatever that means. And yeah, I mean, I guess we will just have to do that because the same thing can be said with Aussie's budget. Same thing can be said with DCPS's budget. Like, well, we know for a fact that DCPS, they have announced that they are cutting things, right? This is I just it feels in
And
talking
in an
about mental
environment
health.
where lots of things are getting cut,
Yeah,
it's valuable to say this specific thing is part of what's getting cut. And this is the problem that we know it's going to cause.
yeah.
Like you're not going to come up with $1.7 billion. We got that. But that $500,000 that you just took away from Champs,
Right.
we know
I
that kids are going to
know.
suffer as a result, right? Like straightforward, no question. That is an easy
So they cut
analysis.
Champs' budget.
Yeah, but champs got a cut. So
Wow.
Martinique, we'll let you have the last word. What are your, I know you've been in and out, you've been mothering in real time. I know lots going on. But you had specifically things with DOT and we've talked extensively about school mental health. So, what are your takeaways from this evening? Because I'm sure what you're thinking, a lot of caregivers are also thinking.
Yeah, that budget could be revised a little better. You know, dedicate better numbers and more. I mean, you have stuff towards these things, but yet it's not really seem like it's broken down. And then if it is for special needs, then are we ever going to get anything? Or are you just saying that and then yet leaving us with a negative and taking these funds and delegating it elsewhere? I mean, I don't know. I was reading over her budget and reading the things and what they offering, all these amounts to, upgrade with teachers and money with them, but nothing on the actual need of special needs and education wise and what needs to be done and what needs to be needed and what to have. I don't see any of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not really clear. I mean, I think
No.
it does require so much study to even understand even what is actually being said about special
Yeah.
benefits or needs, things like that. Like it's not going to be like special education, one line. You got to look at different places. You got to look at the narrative, and we'll keep looking at it. We're going to talk about Medicaid in a couple of weeks, um,
Right.
and knowing that we're coming into April with some pretty major changes. So Mark, maybe your last thoughts here. We didn't talk much about Medicaid, but we know that like the emergency is lifted. Lots of things are happening in that direction. Like we're here responding to the small fires, but I think the big fires, they're just going to hit us in the face.
Yeah, so two things to say about Medicaid. One, if you or someone that you know is a Medicaid beneficiary, even if you haven't needed to do a renewal for years, this year you're probably going to need to do a renewal. And so you can get ahead of the curve by making sure that you're signed up on District Direct. Make sure that the Department of Healthcare Finance has a correct mailing address for you, because they're terrible about keeping track of mailing addresses, and they need current contact information. So, get ahead of Medicaid taking your eligibility away. Make sure you're in the electronic system. It's going to be more likely that you get the mail that you're supposed to, and it'll be faster for you to fill out the application online than trying to go through all of the paper. That's the first thing to say. And yeah, thanks for dropping that link, Shioma. The second thing to say on the money side is that DHCF is going to still be responsible for paying for whatever Medicaid services are in the state plan. Those are not, we budget based on estimates for DHCF. Unlike any other part of the government budget, if they under budget, they still spend the money because you are entitled to that care. So that's an important difference with Medicaid than it is with other programs. The trick is that some providers are going to be paid a lot less next year, or actually in the next few months, than they have been for the past few years, because they've been on enhanced rates during the public health emergency. And when the public health emergency goes away, then those enhanced rates go away as well. So wait lists could get longer. Your provider may be cranky because they're getting paid 80% of what they were getting paid, even though they're doing hard
That
work now.
that's the scariest thing I've heard tonight. Because I will say, since COVID, the quality of care has significantly reduced. And if you cut the money, that's only going to harm the quality of care even more.
Yeah, and that's not an evenly dispersed kind of thing. There are some services that face slightly larger cuts. There are some services that are having some of their rates increased because they get inflationary adjustments that increase their rates up, even while they have federal public health emergency relief funding going down, and so it'll kind of wash itself out. But it's a messy time to be a healthcare provider, and the Medicaid reimbursement rates are shaky right now, while we already are struggling with big workforce challenges in healthcare.
Exactly. Oh man, we are gonna have to put in a prayer for our city this weekend, and there's a lot going on. But thank you so much, Mark. For the bad news, but the news we needed to hear, the sobering reality. And so we'll take this back to the lab Monday, and we'll be back live next Friday for part 2 of family policing, where we just get deeper into police free schools and what that means in policing free schools. Even though, again, these aspirational things feel so like, I don't know where to place them in a moment where, like, the reality of what is possible is right in our faces, and what's not possible. But we'll keep, a luta continua. Yes, if that means everyone should be in the go on that district direct and get all your mail-in address and all your information up, so when your recertification time comes, you have that information, because they only send us through snail mail on that kind of that information. So get your mailing information up to date on District Direct, and we'll just keep holding on to each other, and working together, and hopefully surviving this very tumultuous time. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody. We'll take it back to the lab on Monday and talk out what we're going to do next. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay well and study your budget.
Yes.
Thanks for the chance to be here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.